are we? How are you? How was your Sunday? What's up, guys? How are you? How was your Sunday? How's everything going? I just want to let you know, like right off the bat, that today's Sunday sermon is going to be a little bit rough. It's going to be a little hard because, and I know some of you are like, I don't know if I can take you looking into my soul this week and telling me all the things. I get it, but I'm not talking about that kind of hard. I'm not going to hurt your feelings today. I even got my favorite coffee cup out that says "Let's go fuck shit up." I'm not going to hurt your feelings today. I want to empower you today. I want to empower you today. We're going to talk today about history. The title of today's sermon is Hello There, History. I see you. Hello. Do you guys, y'all know Halloween's coming up? Samhain's coming up, right? We all love Samhain. All of us good witchy witches love Samhain, right? We love Halloween. We love us some after sales on Halloween candy. I mean, who doesn't? And everywhere you go are going to be those gnarly green witches everywhere, right? Right? You're going to see the Hocus Pocus and Wizard of Oz and all of the witches with the green skin and the crazy nose and the warts. But do you know why the depiction of the witch is gnarled, a broken old woman with green skin and a hooked nose? Do you know why? It's not because our ancient ancestors who were witches had green skin. It's not because they ever painted themselves to have green skin. It comes from torture. And I want you to let that sink in a minute. You're celebrating torture. Women that were accused of witchcraft were imprisoned in little tiny damp stone cells. You couldn't stand up all the way. You couldn't lay down and stretch out all the way. So you started to be like this, hunchback and gnarled, because you could not stretch all the way. They were starved until their skin turned sallow and green. Their nails got really thick and calloused and crooked. Their fingers were broken and set incorrectly. Their noses were broken and never fixed. Their bodies were twisted from malnutrition and devices like the rack. Their hair fell out. So this myth, this image of the ugly hag was not a myth. It was propaganda. It was propaganda at its finest that still fucking exists today. And I want you to let that sink in for a minute. It's propaganda that still exists and is celebrated today. It was drawn directly from the suffering of the women that were brutalized for their spiritual beliefs. And it should piss you off. Pisses me off. That image, that celebration, those masks, those costumes, those movies, those shows, all of those things are the very image of persecution. It is the original birthmark of persecution. When a saint is martyred, do they make masks of that person? Do they make masks of their body shape? Do they make memes and movies about how they looked? Pagan practices have been here since the beginning, since before time was time, since before any organized religion was an organized religion. Long before Christianity was born in the deserts in Judea, long before the Roman emperors declared that the cross was their banner, long before that, people worshipped in caves and in groves and under moonlight and in firelight, and they looked to the stars for guidance. And they looked at the signs and the animals and the trees and the flowers on how the seasons were going to be and how their harvest was going to be, and could they feed their family over the winter. How many people name things after constellations? Because I can think of a lot of spacecraft through NASA. How many people name things after gods and goddesses? Again, NASA comes to mind. The Apollo mission. Paganism, in its thousands upon thousands of forms, have existed for 30,000 years in documented ritual cave art, paintings, burial practice, fertility figurines, solar temples that are aligned with the equinoxes. Let that sink in for a minute. 30,000 years. 30,000 years. These practices have existed. But yet most people only know them by the propaganda of the broken up green-faced witch. Christianity, by contrast, has existed for about 2,000 years. Somebody do the math on that and what percentage that is. I think that we forget history. I think that we forget history, and I think that we're just going to end up repeating it. Because it's already happened throughout history. Am I right? I was just a kid in the 80s, but I remember the Satanic Panic. I remember it. And it came on the heels of persecution of other people's ways of life. Those in the LGBTQ community. It came after the persecution of them. Did you know that in the Inquisition alone, which happened in the 12th century, not that long ago, really, when you think of 30,000 years, not that long ago, in the 12th century, and it raged for centuries. The Inquisition alone, there were between 40,000 and 60,000 people that were unalived for witchcraft. Let that sink in for just a minute. Let that sink in for a minute, okay? $40,000 to $60,000 people that were unalived for witchcraft. That does not count the millions of people that were tortured, that were imprisoned, that were stripped of their land and their titles. They were ostracized. That doesn't count them. When the Holy Roman Empire started to sweep across Europe, They didn't spread love. They didn't spread gentle teaching. They didn't spread, let's care for our brothers and sisters. They didn't spread kindness. In fact, when the Holy Roman Empire spread and aligned with Christianity, the world burned. The world burned. Temples were torn down. Libraries of scrolls of ancient centuries and millennia of information were burned. Stones were defaced. Groves were cut down. Gods and goddesses were renamed or demonized. And if persuasion failed to make you join them, fire fucking followed. And what are we seeing right now? Persuasion. Fear. Not love. Not acceptance. Not gentle teaching. Not kindness. Did you know that during the Inquisition, anyone that was deemed a heretic, from the Cathars to the Jews to the witches, were all accused of witchcraft? It didn't matter. If you didn't believe what they believed, witchcraft! Witchcraft! And 40 to 60,000 people died because of it. Millions of others had their shit taken, their family lands, their businesses, their lives. And I want you to think of it this way. In the 30-year war, that was one of the most brutal religious wars in Europe. This is from 1618 to 1648. There were about 8 million people that passed away during that. In 30 years. It's funny, I just noticed that I was frozen on TikTok. But the slow grind of the witch hunts across Europe, across the centuries, village by village, trial by trial, imprisonment by imprisonment, created a similar culture of devastation. Local populations that had been there were destabilized. And when I say this next part, I hope that it makes your skin crawl. Do you know that entire bloodlines were ended because of their belief? What does that remind you of? Think of the wisdom that was destroyed. Think of the wisdom that was destroyed. What does that remind you of? In fact, let's talk about wisdom, because the wisdom of the time, the books of the time, became tools of hatred. What does that remind you of? Books themselves became weapons. The Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of the Witches, was published in 1487 by Heinrich Kramer. And if you guys do not own a copy of this, I don't care what you believe in. If you don't own a copy of this, you should. You should. Because this book was used to identify, to expose, to torture, and to unalive witches. Witches. It spread across Europe like wildfire. Do you know that the Malleus Maleficarum is second only to the Bible in popularity? Let that sink in for a minute. If the Bible is the most famous book, and we can argue that all day long, and the Malleus Maleficarum is the second most popular book, and it taught you how to torture, what does that say about the writer of that book? And what does it say about those that use this book? It should make you mad. It should make your skin crawl. Because I want you to look at some of the books that are being put out today. I want you to look at some of the books that have put out throughout history that have this same exact thing in it. When this book spread, it told men how to twist confessions from women. Let that sink all the way in, my friends. It taught men how to twist confessions from women. It taught how to spot the Sabbats, the holidays. And this part right here ought to make you want to rage against everything. It taught them how to justify cruelty as godliness. Is your skin crawling yet? Are you angry yet? Are you nauseated? The Formicarius was put out in 1435, and it did much of the same thing. These weren't just dusty theological texts. These were not just books that were put out so you could learn about the history of this or this. They were manuals of genocide. I said what I said. But that persecution wasn't just confined to Europe. When those exact same people came to the Americas, what happened? They carried that same book, that same cross, that same sword across the ocean. And before they got here, do you know that there was an estimated 60 to 100 million indigenous people in the Americas? Let that sink in a minute. 60 to 100 million indigenous peoples in the Americas. There are 170 million users on TikTok alone. So if that number, 170 million, if that was the amount of indigenous peoples that existed, think about that. Think about that. And if you can't wrap your brain around it, look at the population of the city you live in. I live in Tulsa, and in just Tulsa, not the suburbs, just Tulsa, there are about 480,000 people that live here. 60 to 100 million indigenous people that lived here. And guess what? Within just a few centuries of these books being pushed, this conquest, forced conversions, what does that remind you of? This next thing that I say should make you want to throw up. So get ready. 60 to 80 million indigenous people in the Americas. And after this practice of persecution and twisting confessions and forced conversions, and let's just call it what it is, exterminations, reduce that number by 90%. 90%. So if there were 100 million indigenous people in the Americas, that dropped that number to 10 million across North and South America. that is a bigger loss than World War I and World War II together. Both in Europe and the Americas, what marked people for destruction was their spirituality, was their cultural beliefs, was their refusal to bow before somebody that just came from somewhere that they don't know about, telling them that their way of thinking was right, that their way of practice was right. The thing you've known your entire life, incorrect, wrong. And if you refuse to go along with it, they had a book that would fix you. They had 2 books that would fix you. Do you guys know that there have been studies? There have been studies, and this, for all of you spiritual people that are watching, for all of you spiritual people that love your empathicness, your clairvoyance, your tarot cards, your divination tools, your intuition, being able to control flames or burst clouds, for all of you that have these skills and gifts and abilities, which, by the way, is everyone. Everyone's born with all the clairs. There are studies, like studies that are cited by Walter Burkett and a lot of other research into persecution, that they thought that the Roman Empire's campaign across Europe would show that their DNA was more, or they did a study to try to prove that the Roman Empire, altered the DNA of humanity. And boy, did they prove it. Boy, did they prove it. But they proved it in a way that they didn't expect. Because of the campaign against witches and oracles and seers, which, by the way, are all listed in the Bible. All of the great kings of the Bible had a seer or an oracle or a wise person that they spoke to. The Holy Roman Empire's campaign against these peoples altered human evolution. Let that sink in. They altered human evolution by extermination. By systematically exterminating families that had strong psychic gifts. And notice I didn't say people, I said families. Bloodlines that had strong psychic gifts. Those who dreamed of the future. Those who healed with their hands. Those who knew prophecy. Those wise men and wise women. The empire reduced the genetic frequency of psychic abilities in the population. So they not only exterminated individuals and families and bloodlines, they scarred the future of human potential. And I want you to let that sink in. Now, don't get it all messed up, because persecution is not unique just to pagans. Christians also were persecuted by other Christians. Think about the Protestant Reformation of Europe that tore Europe apart, where Catholics and Protestants turned on each other. They hunted one another in England and Germany and France, in Russia, in Armenia. Every single sect of Christianity that gained power turned its sword on those who dissented from their beliefs. It's not a Christian problem. It's a fucking human problem. It's a human problem. But unfortunately, the union of that religion With that empire, the use of the state power magnified that problem into centuries of bloodshed. So why does it matter now? Why does the Inquisition matter now? Why does someone that died hundreds and hundreds of years ago, why does that matter now? Because that persecution never ended. That persecution never ended. I've spent the majority of my adult life in Oklahoma. I was adopted into a family that has a lot of indigenous practices, a lot of indigenous ties, etc. Do you know that in the state of Oklahoma, everywhere you go, you're on reservation? You're on a reservation. You wouldn't know it. You wouldn't know it. If you go across the Southwest and you see the reservations there, you know it. But here, you wouldn't know it. They told you you had to go there. They told you you had to stay right here. And then when they decided that other things were on that land, they told you to get off. And when they destroyed it, they gave it back. If y'all don't believe me, look up the story of Pitcher, Oklahoma. It'll make you sick. Even now, in 2025, inflammatory rhetoric is spreading across the internet, people, etc. They're calling for new witch hunts. There are books being released right now as we speak, calling for witch hunts. There are attorneys pandering on Instagram right now for class action lawsuits for witchcraft from Etsy. Do you think that it's just going to stay there? Do you think that it's just going to stay there on that one platform, on that one company? If you do, think, McFly, think. Even now, pagans are ostracized. They're mocked. They're assaulted for daring to practice the old ways, for daring to practice the very things that is in their DNA, that is in their culture, that if you're in the United States, let me tell you something, okay? If you live in the United States, if your ancestors are European, if you grew up with a granny that knew the things, if you grew up going to a church that spoke the devil out of someone, if you grew up going to a church or a place where they had somebody that would buy your warts away, that would lay their hands on you and heal, oh, baby, that's witchcraft. Baby, that's witchcraft. Because that is healing. That is folk healing. That's granny magic. That's mountain magic. I don't care if it's powwow magic from the Pennsylvania Dutch or Appalachian magic or Ozark magic. It's magic. It's witchcraft. It was not taught in the church. No. There's a book called Backwoods Witchcraft, and it's one of the few books that I recommend a lot. And if you haven't read that book, I don't care what you practice. I don't care if you call yourself a witch or a Wiccan or a Druid or a heathen or a Christian. Read that book. Read that book. Because guess what? It's going to hurt your brain. It's going to blow your mind when you realize, especially if you grew up in America, it's going to blow your mind the things that you did growing up that are witchcraft. How many of y'all grew up learning about the maypole and May Day? Witchcraft. How many of y'all love Halloween? Witchcraft. Do you know the history of Samhain? The history of Samhain is much like the Day of the Dead in Latin America. This is a time when the veil is down and the ancestors freely go back and forth. So do the Ogobugas too. So do the bad things, the evil things. Do you know why you wear a mask at Halloween? So they won't find you. There were bonfires, big, magnificent bonfires to celebrate the harvest, to celebrate the Yule coming up, the winter, the new year coming up. But if you got too far away from that bonfire, you better have a mask. So if you got caught on the way home by an Ooga Booga or a Booger Man or a werewolf or a demon, they wouldn't recognize you because you had on a mask, right? Do you know that if you track down the star charts of where the stars were when Jesus was born, they don't line up with the dates? But that's a whole other sermon, isn't it? Pagan traditions are older than any empire. They're older than any book. They're older than any symbol. They're older than any sword. They were written in the stars. They were written in the fire. They were written in the stone circles and the burial mounds and the cave paintings and the pottery that still exist today. There is not an empire on earth that can erase what the earth remembers herself. As we go into spooky season, when you see those caricatures of witches out there, honor those women. Honor those women. Honor those women that were tortured sometimes for years to be turned into propaganda. Honor the millions of indigenous people that were slaughtered for their earth-born faiths. Honor the pagans and the shamans and the healers and the oracles and the wise people and the medicine men and the medicine women and the visionaries who carried this wisdom on by word of mouth despite the threat of being burned at the stake, despite the threat of torture and the rack and the rope. Witches that exist today, indigenous peoples that exist today, stand not extinguished, not broken, but alive. The fire that once burned them burns inside of us. Will not be extinguished. For every grove that was cut down, we will plant 10 more. For every book of knowledge that was burned, we will write thousands. For every life that was taken, we will remember. The old ways live because we live. And they will remain long after empires turn to dust.